The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned streets of Millbrook as Jake Harrison crouched behind the rusted shell of an overturned delivery truck, his weathered hands gripping a modified crossbow. 3 months had passed since the outbreak began, and the once thriving suburban town now served as a hunting ground where the living fought desperately against the infected. Jake's breath formed small clouds in the crisp autumn air as he surveyed the scene before him, counting at least 15 zombies shambling through what used to be the town square. Their grotesque moans echoed off empty storefronts, a haunting symphony that had become the soundtrack of this new world. Behind him, hidden in the shadows of a collapsed coffee shop, his team of survivors waited for his signal. Marcus Thompson, a former military engineer, clutched a homemade explosive device, his dark eyes focused and calculating. Beside him, Elena Rodriguez checked her ammunition count for the 3rd time, her nursing background having proven invaluable in treating bite wounds and infections that weren't quite fatal. The youngest member of their group, 17-year-old Tyler Brooks, nervously adjusted his grip on a reinforced baseball bat, his youthful face marked by the premature lines of someone who had seen too much death. Jake had discovered Tyler 3 weeks ago, hiding in a school basement, surrounded by the bodies of his infected classmates. The boy had survived by using his knowledge of the building's layout to outmaneuver the zombies, creating noise distractions and escape routes that kept him alive when others had fallen. Now, Tyler served as their scout, his small frame and quick reflexes making him perfect for reconnaissance missions. The plan they had developed was risky but necessary. Intelligence gathered from other survivor groups indicated that a massive horde was moving toward their current safe house, a fortified warehouse on the outskirts of town. They had perhaps 48 hours before the building would be overrun, and their only chance of survival lay in reaching the military evacuation point 30 miles north. However, the direct route was blocked by hundreds of infected, forcing them to take a dangerous detour through the town center. Jake's strategy involved creating a series of controlled distractions to draw the zombies away from their intended path, using the infected's primitive hunting instincts against them. The first phase required splitting the group, with Marcus and Elena moving to the old church bell tower to create noise distractions, while Jake and Tyler cleared a path through the main street. The infected in Millbrook displayed the typical characteristics they had learned to expect: slow, shambling movement, heightened sensitivity to sound, and an insatiable hunger for living flesh. However, Jake had noticed disturbing variations among some of the zombies, particularly those who had been infected more recently. These newer infected retained more coordination and seemed capable of basic problem-solving, making them significantly more dangerous than their deteriorated counterparts. As Jake watched the zombies below, he identified several of these enhanced infected among the group, their movements more purposeful and their responses to stimuli more immediate. One of them, a woman in a torn business suit, stood perfectly still near the fountain, her head tilted as if listening for something specific. This behavior was new and deeply unsettling, suggesting that the infection might be evolving or that some infected retained fragments of their human intelligence. The implications were terrifying, as it meant their established survival tactics might become obsolete. Jake signaled to Marcus, who began his careful ascent to the bell tower, moving with the practiced silence of someone who understood that a single misstep could doom them all. The plan required precise timing, as they would have only minutes to execute their escape once the distractions began. Elena followed Marcus, her medical bag secured tightly to her back, containing precious antibiotics and pain medication that could mean the difference between life and death for any injured team member. Tyler crept closer to Jake's position, his young face set with determination that belied his age. The boy had proven himself repeatedly over the past weeks, showing a natural aptitude for survival that impressed even the hardened adults in their group. His ability to move silently and think quickly under pressure had saved their lives on multiple occasions, and Jake had come to rely on Tyler's instincts almost as much as his own. The infected below continued their aimless wandering, occasionally bumping into each other or obstacles, their decaying bodies showing various stages of decomposition. Some were recent enough to be recognizable as former humans, while others had deteriorated to the point where their humanity was barely discernible beneath layers of rot and decay. The smell of death permeated the air, a constant reminder of what awaited anyone who made a mistake in this new world. Jake checked his watch, noting that they were running ahead of schedule, which was both good and bad. Being early meant they had more time to observe and adjust their plan, but it also meant more time for something to go wrong. In this world, patience was a luxury they could rarely afford, as every moment spent in the open increased their chances of discovery. The sound of Marcus reaching the bell tower came as a soft scraping noise, barely audible but enough to make Jake tense. One of the infected, an elderly man in pajamas, turned his head toward the sound, his milky eyes scanning the area with disturbing focus. For a moment, Jake feared their position had been compromised, but the zombie's attention quickly shifted to a piece of debris blown by the wind. The close call served as a reminder of how precarious their situation truly was, balanced on the knife's edge between survival and becoming another addition to the growing army of the infected. The sharp crack of the church bell shattered the morning silence, its bronze voice calling across the desolate town square with an authority that demanded attention. Marcus had struck the bell with calculated precision, creating a sound loud enough to draw the infected but controlled enough to avoid attracting every zombie within miles. The effect was immediate and dramatic as the 15 zombies in the square turned almost in unison toward the source of the noise, their primitive brains responding to the auditory stimulus with single-minded hunger. Jake watched as the infected began their shambling migration toward the church, their movements creating a grotesque parade of decay and desperation. The woman in the business suit moved with unsettling coordination, leading the pack with purposeful strides that confirmed Jake's worst fears about the evolving nature of the infection. Her ability to navigate obstacles and maintain direction suggested a level of cognitive function that made her exponentially more dangerous than the typical mindless zombie. Tyler pressed closer to Jake's position, his young eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination as they observed the infected's behavior. The boy had developed an almost scientific interest in zombie patterns, cataloging their responses and weaknesses with the methodical approach of someone whose survival depended on understanding his enemies. His observations had proven invaluable to the group's survival strategies, particularly his discovery that certain infected retained muscle memory from their previous lives, making former athletes or military personnel significantly more threatening than civilian zombies. As the last of the visible infected disappeared around the corner toward the church, Jake signaled for Tyler to begin their advance through the main street. They moved with practiced stealth, using abandoned vehicles and debris as cover while maintaining visual contact with each other. The empty storefronts they passed told stories of panic and desperation, their shattered windows and scattered merchandise bearing witness to the chaos that had consumed the town during the initial outbreak. Jake's mind wandered briefly to those first terrifying days when the infection had spread like wildfire through the population, turning neighbors into predators and transforming familiar streets into hunting grounds. He remembered the emergency broadcasts that had quickly devolved from reassuring updates to desperate pleas for help, followed by the ominous silence that marked the collapse of organized civilization. The memory of his wife's final moments flashed through his consciousness, her terrified eyes as the infection took hold, forcing him to make the impossible choice between love and survival. He pushed the painful recollection aside, focusing instead on the immediate task of keeping his current family of survivors alive. Tyler's sharp intake of breath brought Jake's attention back to the present as the boy pointed toward a side alley where movement had caught his eye. 3 infected emerged from behind a dumpster, their appearance suggesting they had been feeding recently, their clothes and faces stained with fresh blood that glistened in the morning sunlight. These zombies moved with the enhanced coordination Jake had learned to fear, their recent feeding having apparently strengthened their motor functions and increased their awareness. The lead zombie, a middle-aged man in mechanic's coveralls, scanned the area with disturbing intelligence, his head moving in a systematic pattern that suggested he was actively hunting rather than simply wandering. Jake raised his crossbow, taking careful aim at the mechanic's head while calculating the risk of the shot. The crossbow was nearly silent, but missing would leave them exposed and potentially alert other infected in the area. Tyler readied his baseball bat, understanding that if Jake's shot failed, close combat would be inevitable. The boy had become proficient with his weapon, learning to strike with maximum force while maintaining enough mobility to escape if overwhelmed. His technique had improved dramatically since joining the group, transforming from desperate swings to calculated strikes that could crush a zombie's skull with devastating efficiency. The mechanic zombie suddenly stopped moving, his head tilting in a gesture that was disturbingly human-like, as if he had detected something beyond the range of normal zombie senses. This behavior was new and deeply troubling, suggesting that some infected might be developing enhanced sensory capabilities that could make hiding from them nearly impossible. Jake held his breath, maintaining perfect stillness while the zombie continued his systematic scan of the area. The creature's eyes, though clouded with infection, seemed to focus with an intensity that defied everything they thought they knew about zombie behavior. After what felt like an eternity, the mechanic zombie resumed his shambling movement, leading his companions deeper into the alley and away from Jake and Tyler's position. The close encounter left both survivors shaken, as it confirmed their worst fears about the infection's continued evolution. Jake made a mental note to share this observation with the group, as it would require significant adjustments to their survival strategies and escape plans. The sound of the church bell continued to echo across the town, drawing more infected from the surrounding buildings and side streets. Jake counted at least 20 additional zombies emerging from various hiding places, their numbers far exceeding his initial estimates. The realization that they had been surrounded by so many infected without knowing it sent a chill down his spine, highlighting how precarious their situation had become. Marcus and Elena would need to maintain the distraction for several more minutes to ensure safe passage, but the growing crowd of zombies around the church was creating its own set of problems. Tyler tugged on Jake's sleeve, pointing toward their intended escape route where a new group of infected had appeared, blocking their path to the warehouse district. These zombies moved with the slow, deteriorated gait of long-term infected, their bodies showing advanced stages of decomposition that made them less dangerous individually but more numerous as a group. Jake quickly assessed their options, realizing that their carefully planned route would need immediate modification to account for this unexpected obstacle. The boys' keen eyes had spotted a potential alternative path through a series of connected backyards, but it would require them to move through unfamiliar territory where other infected might be hiding. The decision to deviate from their planned route carried significant risks, as they would be operating without the benefit of prior reconnaissance or established escape routes. The distant sound of shattering glass echoed from the church direction, followed by Marcus's distinctive whistle signal indicating that their distraction was working better than expected. Jake felt a surge of relief knowing that his team was successfully drawing the infected away from their escape route, but the relief was short-lived as Tyler grabbed his arm and pointed toward a horrifying sight emerging from the pharmacy across the street. A group of 7 infected had appeared, but these were unlike any zombies they had encountered before, moving with coordinated precision that suggested they were operating as a pack rather than individual hunters. The lead infected, a tall man in a doctor's coat, gestured with deliberate movements toward Jake and Tyler's hiding spot, his actions displaying a level of communication and strategic thinking that shattered every assumption about zombie behavior. The other infected responded to his signals, spreading out in a flanking pattern that demonstrated tactical awareness and group coordination that should have been impossible for creatures driven purely by hunger and instinct. Jake's blood ran cold as he realized they were facing a new evolution of the infection, one that retained not just individual intelligence but collective problem-solving abilities that made them exponentially more dangerous than anything they had previously encountered. Tyler's face had gone pale with terror as he watched the infected doctor point directly at their position, his clouded eyes somehow maintaining enough focus to track their movements despite the supposed blindness that characterized most zombies. The boy's hand trembled as he gripped his baseball bat, understanding instinctively that their usual tactics would be useless against enemies who could think, plan, and coordinate their attacks with military-like precision. Jake made a split-second decision to abandon their current position, grabbing Tyler's shoulder and pulling him toward the back entrance of the abandoned hardware store behind them. They moved with desperate urgency, knowing that their survival now depended on reaching cover before the intelligent infected could complete their encirclement. The sound of their footsteps on broken glass seemed impossibly loud in the morning air, and Jake cursed silently as he realized they were leaving an obvious trail for their pursuers to follow. Behind them, the infected doctor let out a sound that was neither moan nor scream but something far more disturbing, a vocalization that seemed to carry meaning and intent, possibly communicating instructions to his pack members. The other infected responded immediately, their movements becoming more coordinated and purposeful as they began their pursuit with the relentless efficiency of trained hunters. Jake and Tyler burst through the hardware store's back door, finding themselves in a maze of overturned shelving units and scattered tools that provided both cover and obstacles to their escape. The store's interior was dimly lit by sunlight filtering through dirty windows, creating shadows that could hide either salvation or death around every corner. Tyler immediately began scanning for useful weapons, his survival instincts driving him to seek any advantage they could find in their desperate situation. Jake moved toward the front of the store, peering through the grimy windows to assess their pursuers' progress while formulating a new escape plan that could account for the infected's enhanced capabilities. The sight that greeted him through the window was even more terrifying than he had anticipated, as the infected doctor stood in the middle of the street, his head tilted upward as if he were actually listening to the sounds coming from inside the hardware store. The other pack members had positioned themselves at strategic points around the building, creating a perimeter that suggested they understood concepts like containment and tactical positioning that should have been beyond zombie comprehension. One of the infected, a woman in nurse scrubs, was examining the ground near their entry point, her behavior indicating she was actually tracking their footprints with the skill of an experienced hunter. Jake realized with growing horror that they were dealing with infected who retained professional skills and knowledge from their previous lives, making them not just intelligent zombies but specialists who could apply their former expertise to hunting and killing the living. Tyler appeared at Jake's side carrying a crowbar and a handful of heavy-duty zip ties, his young mind already working on improvised weapons and defensive strategies that might give them an edge against their superhuman pursuers. The boy's resourcefulness continued to impress Jake, as Tyler had also grabbed a small mirror that could be used for reconnaissance and a spray bottle filled with industrial cleaner that might temporarily blind or disorient their attackers. Jake checked his crossbow, confirming he had 4 bolts remaining, while calculating the odds of successfully eliminating 7 intelligent infected with limited ammunition and improvised weapons. The sound of deliberate footsteps on the store's front porch indicated that their pursuers had completed their reconnaissance and were beginning their assault with the patience and methodology of professional soldiers. Jake motioned for Tyler to move toward the store's rear exit, but the boy shook his head and pointed toward the basement stairs, suggesting they could use the building's lower level to confuse their pursuers and potentially escape through a different route. The basement option was risky, as it could trap them underground with no escape route, but it might also provide the element of surprise they desperately needed to survive this encounter. The front door's handle began to turn slowly, the movement so controlled and deliberate that it was clear their pursuers were taking time to ensure they didn't alert their prey prematurely. Jake made the decision to follow Tyler's suggestion, leading them both down the narrow basement stairs while trying to minimize the noise of their descent. The basement was filled with storage boxes and old inventory, creating a labyrinth of hiding spots that could work to their advantage if they could avoid being cornered in the confined space. Above them, the infected entered the store with coordinated precision, their footsteps moving in patterns that suggested they were conducting a systematic search rather than the random wandering typical of normal zombies. The basement's musty air carried the scent of old wood and rust as Jake and Tyler crouched behind a stack of paint cans, listening to the methodical footsteps above them moving with the precision of a military sweep. The infected doctor's voice carried through the floorboards, producing sounds that were disturbingly close to actual speech, though the words remained incomprehensible to human ears. Tyler's eyes had adjusted to the dim basement lighting, and he pointed toward a small window near the ceiling that might provide an escape route if they could reach it without making noise. Jake studied the window's position, calculating that they would need to stack boxes to create a makeshift ladder, but the process would inevitably create sounds that could alert their pursuers to their location. The footsteps above suddenly stopped, replaced by an ominous silence that was far more terrifying than the sounds of movement had been. Jake strained his ears, trying to determine whether the infected had left the building or were simply pausing in their search pattern. The silence stretched for several minutes before being broken by a new sound that made both survivors' blood run cold, the unmistakable noise of the infected systematically destroying the store's interior, ripping apart shelving units and overturning displays in what appeared to be a deliberate attempt to flush out their hidden prey. Tyler gripped his crowbar tighter, understanding that their hiding spot would soon be discovered if the infected decided to search the basement with the same thoroughness they were applying to the main floor. Jake made a desperate decision, whispering to Tyler that they needed to create their own distraction to draw the infected away from the basement entrance. The boy nodded grimly, understanding that their survival now depended on taking offensive action rather than simply hiding and hoping to avoid detection. Jake selected one of his precious crossbow bolts, knowing that he would need to make every shot count in the confrontation that was about to unfold. The sound of splintering wood from above indicated that the infected were systematically destroying anything that could provide hiding places, their methodical approach suggesting they had unlimited time and patience to complete their hunt. Tyler positioned himself near the basement stairs, ready to use his crowbar against any infected who attempted to descend, while Jake moved toward the small window to begin the dangerous process of creating their escape route. The first infected foot appeared on the basement stairs, moving with careful deliberation that confirmed these creatures were far more dangerous than the mindless zombies they had previously encountered. Jake raised his crossbow, taking aim at the descending figure while Tyler prepared to strike with his crowbar if the shot failed to eliminate the threat. The infected nurse appeared in the stairwell, her head moving in systematic sweeps as she scanned the basement for signs of their presence. Her movements were so controlled and purposeful that she seemed more like a living human than a zombie, except for the telltale signs of infection that marked her pale skin and clouded eyes. Jake held his breath, waiting for the perfect moment to take his shot while hoping that eliminating one infected wouldn't immediately alert the others to their exact location. The nurse's gaze swept across their hiding spot without detecting them, but her systematic search pattern indicated she would discover them within minutes if they didn't act soon. Tyler caught Jake's attention and pointed toward a different section of the basement where old pipes ran along the ceiling, suggesting they might be able to use the building's infrastructure to create noise distractions in other areas. Jake understood the boys' strategy immediately, realizing they could use the building's plumbing to create sounds that would draw the infected away from their actual position. The nurse continued her descent, her feet making almost no sound on the wooden stairs despite her obvious weight and bulk. This level of motor control was unprecedented among the infected they had previously encountered, suggesting that these evolved zombies retained not just intelligence but also fine motor skills that made them capable of stealth and precision movements. Jake aimed his crossbow at the nurse's head, knowing that a body shot might not be sufficient to stop an infected with enhanced physical capabilities. The distance was perfect for an accurate shot, but the confined space of the basement meant that missing could result in immediate close combat with an opponent who possessed both human intelligence and zombie strength. Tyler moved silently toward the pipes, his crowbar ready to strike the metal and create the distraction they desperately needed. The timing would be critical, as they would have only seconds to execute their escape plan once the noise began and the infected's attention was diverted. Jake's finger tightened on the crossbow trigger as the nurse reached the bottom of the stairs, her head turning toward their hiding spot with the inevitable certainty of discovery. The moment stretched endlessly as predator and prey faced each other in the dim basement, both sides understanding that the next few seconds would determine who would survive this deadly encounter. Above them, the other infected had stopped their destruction, apparently waiting for their scout to report on the basement's contents before proceeding with their coordinated assault. Tyler's crowbar struck the exposed pipe with a resounding clang that echoed through the basement like a gunshot, the metallic sound reverberating off the concrete walls and creating exactly the distraction they needed. The infected nurse's head snapped toward the noise with predatory focus, her body turning away from Jake's position and providing him with the perfect opportunity for a clean headshot. Jake's crossbow bolt flew true, striking the nurse in the base of her skull with enough force to drop her instantly, her body crumpling to the basement floor without the typical thrashing and moaning that characterized normal zombie deaths. The silence that followed was both encouraging and terrifying, as it suggested the bolt had been effective while also indicating that the other infected above might have heard something that would draw them to investigate. Tyler immediately began stacking boxes beneath the small window, working with desperate efficiency while Jake reloaded his crossbow and positioned himself to cover their escape route. The sound of rapid footsteps from above confirmed their worst fears, as the remaining infected responded to their packmates' disappearance with coordinated urgency that demonstrated their ability to recognize and react to threats against their group. Jake could hear the infected doctor's voice again, this time producing sounds that were unmistakably communicative, possibly coordinating a response to the loss of their scout with tactical precision that rivaled human military units. Tyler had successfully created a makeshift ladder and was already climbing toward the window when the basement door burst open, revealing the infected doctor framed in the doorway like a nightmare vision of medical authority gone wrong. The creature's white coat was stained with blood and decay, but his movements retained the confident bearing of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions, except now those decisions involved hunting and killing rather than healing and saving. Jake fired his second crossbow bolt without hesitation, but the doctor moved with inhuman speed, dodging the projectile with reflexes that seemed impossible for a zombie. The bolt embedded itself in the wooden doorframe as the doctor let out another of his disturbing vocalizations, this one clearly serving as a call for reinforcements from his remaining pack members. Tyler had reached the window and was working frantically to open the rusted latch while Jake faced the terrifying reality of engaging in close combat with an infected who possessed both enhanced intelligence and supernatural physical abilities. The doctor descended the stairs with measured steps, his clouded eyes fixed on Jake with an intensity that suggested personal recognition rather than simple hunger. Behind him, the sounds of other infected entering the store indicated that their entire pack was converging on the basement for what appeared to be a coordinated assault designed to eliminate any possibility of escape. Jake drew his backup weapon, a reinforced machete that had served him well in previous encounters, while calculating his chances of surviving long enough for Tyler to complete their escape route. The doctor reached the basement floor and began moving toward Jake with the confident stride of a predator who knew his prey was trapped, his hands reaching forward with grasping motions that retained disturbing echoes of his former profession's healing touch. Tyler's voice called out that the window was open, but Jake realized with growing despair that he might not be able to reach the escape route before the doctor closed the distance between them. The infected physician moved with purpose and intelligence, positioning himself to block Jake's path to the window while simultaneously herding him toward a corner where escape would be impossible. Jake swung his machete in a defensive arc, hoping to keep the doctor at bay while he searched for an opportunity to break past the creature's guard and reach Tyler's position. The doctor's response was swift and calculated, stepping back just enough to avoid the blade while maintaining his strategic position between Jake and freedom. The sound of additional infected descending the stairs created a sense of overwhelming dread, as Jake realized he was about to face multiple intelligent zombies in a confined space with limited weapons and no backup support. Tyler's desperate voice called for Jake to hurry, but the boy's concern was evident as he understood that his friend and protector was facing impossible odds in the basement below. Jake made a desperate decision to charge directly at the doctor, hoping that aggressive action might create enough confusion to break through the creature's defensive position and reach the escape route. The doctor's reaction was immediate and terrifying, meeting Jake's charge with coordinated movements that demonstrated combat training or retained muscle memory from his previous life. Their collision sent both figures crashing into a stack of storage boxes, creating a thunderous noise that would certainly alert every infected in the area to their exact location. The impact with the storage boxes sent tools and hardware cascading across the basement floor, creating a treacherous landscape of scattered nails, screws, and metal fragments that threatened to trip or injure anyone moving through the area. Jake rolled away from the doctor's grasping hands, his machete clattering against the concrete as he struggled to regain his footing on the unstable debris. The infected physician recovered with disturbing grace, his movements fluid and controlled despite the violent collision, demonstrating physical coordination that defied everything Jake thought he knew about zombie motor functions. Tyler's panicked voice echoed from the window above, urging Jake to move faster as the sound of multiple infected descending the stairs grew louder and more immediate. Jake scrambled toward his fallen weapon while the doctor advanced with methodical precision, stepping carefully over the scattered debris with the sure-footed confidence of someone who retains spatial awareness and tactical thinking. The basement's dim lighting created shifting shadows that made it difficult to track the doctor's exact position, but Jake could hear the creature's steady breathing, a sound that was deeply unsettling coming from something that should have been driven purely by mindless hunger. Two more infected appeared at the bottom of the stairs, their coordinated arrival suggesting they had waited for the optimal moment to join the assault rather than simply rushing blindly into combat. Jake's hand closed around his machete's handle just as the doctor lunged forward with surprising speed, forcing him to roll sideways and swing the blade in a desperate defensive arc that barely missed the creature's reaching fingers. The infected physician's tactical awareness became evident as he immediately adjusted his approach, using the basement's support pillars as cover while maneuvering to cut off Jake's retreat routes with the skill of an experienced combatant. Tyler had managed to squeeze through the small window and was now calling down instructions about the external situation, reporting that the area outside appeared clear but warning that their escape route would only remain viable for a few more minutes. Jake realized that his survival depended on creating enough chaos to disrupt the infected's coordinated assault, so he began kicking at the scattered hardware on the floor, sending metal objects flying in all directions to create noise and confusion. The strategy worked partially, as the additional infected showed momentary hesitation when struck by flying debris, but the doctor remained focused and continued his methodical advance with unwavering determination. Jake's machete connected with one of the secondary infected, a man in construction clothes, but the blade became lodged in the creature's shoulder rather than delivering the fatal head wound he had intended. The infected construction worker grabbed the machete's blade with both hands, his enhanced strength allowing him to maintain his grip despite the sharp metal cutting into his palms, effectively disarming Jake and leaving him defenseless against 3 intelligent zombies. Tyler's voice took on a note of desperate urgency as he reported seeing additional infected approaching the building from multiple directions, suggesting that the pack's vocalizations had successfully summoned reinforcements from the surrounding area. Jake abandoned his trapped weapon and grabbed a heavy wrench from the scattered tools, swinging it with desperate force at the doctor's head while simultaneously trying to push past the creature toward the makeshift ladder. The doctor's response was swift and calculated, ducking under the wrench swing while grabbing Jake's wrist with iron-strong fingers that threatened to crush bone and muscle with their relentless pressure. Jake's free hand found a handful of loose screws and bolts, which he threw directly into the doctor's face, hoping to temporarily blind or disorient the creature long enough to break free from its grip. The infected physician released Jake's wrist to protect his eyes, providing the opening Jake needed to sprint toward Tyler's escape route while the other infected scrambled to intercept his movement. Jake leaped onto the stacked boxes with desperate energy, feeling the makeshift ladder shift and wobble under his weight as he climbed toward the small window where Tyler waited with outstretched hands. The doctor's frustrated vocalization echoed through the basement as he realized his prey was escaping, the sound carrying notes of what seemed like genuine anger rather than simple hunger. Tyler grabbed Jake's arms and helped pull him through the narrow window opening, both survivors tumbling onto the ground outside the hardware store as the sounds of enraged infected echoed from the basement below. They found themselves in a small alley behind the building, temporarily safe but acutely aware that their escape had been observed by the intelligent infected who would undoubtedly adapt their tactics for future encounters. Jake's hands were shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion as he retrieved his radio to contact Marcus and Elena, knowing that their team needed immediate warning about the evolved infected and their unprecedented capabilities. Jake's radio crackled to life with Marcus's voice reporting that their distraction at the church had worked too well, drawing nearly 50 infected to their position and forcing them to barricade themselves in the bell tower with dwindling ammunition and no clear escape route. Elena's medical training had proven invaluable as she treated a bite wound Marcus had sustained during their ascent, but the injury was deep enough to raise concerns about infection even if the zombie's teeth hadn't penetrated far enough to transmit the virus. Tyler pressed against the alley wall, his young face pale with exhaustion and terror as he processed the reality that they were facing a new type of infected that could think, plan, and coordinate attacks with military precision. Jake quickly briefed Marcus and Elena about the intelligent infected pack, describing their tactical awareness and communication abilities while emphasizing that their established survival protocols would need immediate revision to account for these enhanced threats. The sound of breaking glass from the hardware store indicated that the trapped infected were systematically destroying the basement to create their own escape route, demonstrating problem-solving abilities that made them exponentially more dangerous than traditional zombies. Marcus's voice carried notes of disbelief as he struggled to accept Jake's report about coordinated zombie behavior, but Elena's medical background allowed her to quickly grasp the implications of an evolving infection that could retain cognitive functions while enhancing physical capabilities. Tyler tugged on Jake's sleeve and pointed toward the end of the alley where movement suggested that additional infected were beginning to surround their position, forcing them to make immediate decisions about their next move without the luxury of careful planning. Jake realized that their original escape route to the warehouse was now completely compromised, as the intelligent infected would undoubtedly anticipate their movements and position themselves to intercept any attempt to reach their intended destination. The radio transmission from Marcus became increasingly urgent as he reported that the infected surrounding the church were displaying unusual behavior, stacking debris, and climbing over obstacles with coordination that suggested they were learning from the intelligent pack's example. Elena's voice joined the conversation with the terrifying observation that some of the infected at the church were actually using tools, picking up rocks and broken pieces of wood to throw at the bell tower with accuracy that indicated retained motor skills and spatial reasoning. Jake made the difficult decision to abandon their planned rendezvous with Marcus and Elena, instructing them to remain in the bell tower until the infected crowd dispersed while he and Tyler attempted to reach the military evacuation point through an alternate route. Tyler's knowledge of the town's layout became crucial as he suggested using the old storm drain system to move underground, avoiding the infected entirely while making progress toward their ultimate destination. The storm drains were dangerous and potentially flooded, but they offered the only viable option for avoiding the growing number of intelligent infected who seemed to be coordinating a town-wide search for the surviving humans. Jake's decision to split the group was agonizing, but the tactical situation left no alternative as staying together would only ensure that all 4 survivors would be captured or killed by the evolving infected threat. Marcus acknowledged the plan with obvious reluctance, understanding that their separation might be permanent if either group encountered insurmountable obstacles during their respective escape attempts. Elena's voice carried professional concern as she warned Jake about the medical implications of traveling through storm drains, citing risks of infection, injury, and exposure that could prove fatal even if they avoided the zombie threat. Tyler had already located a storm drain entrance behind a nearby dumpster, the metal grate partially rusted and loose enough to be removed with minimal noise and effort. Jake took one last look at the hardware store, where sounds of destruction continued as the intelligent infected worked to free themselves, their persistence and problem-solving abilities serving as a grim reminder of how much the rules of survival had changed. The boys' courage impressed Jake as Tyler volunteered to enter the storm drain first, despite his obvious fear of the dark, confined space that would serve as their underground highway to potential safety. Jake followed Tyler into the drain system, pulling the grate back into position behind them while hoping that the intelligent infected wouldn't think to search the underground passages for their escaped prey. The storm drain was larger than expected, allowing them to move in a crouched position rather than crawling, but the darkness was absolute and the air carried the stench of stagnant water and decay that made breathing difficult. Tyler's whispered voice guided Jake through the initial turns of the tunnel system, the boy's natural sense of direction proving invaluable in the disorienting underground environment where wrong turns could lead to dead ends or flooded passages. Behind them, the sounds of the surface world grew muted and distant, replaced by the echo of dripping water and their own careful footsteps as they began their dangerous journey through the bowels of the infected town. The storm drain stretched endlessly ahead of them, a concrete tunnel that seemed to swallow their flashlight beam while amplifying every sound they made into echoing whispers that could potentially alert any infected who might have found their way into the underground system. Tyler's sense of direction proved invaluable as he navigated the branching passages with confidence born from years of exploring the town's hidden spaces, his intimate knowledge of Millbrook's infrastructure becoming their lifeline in the suffocating darkness. Jake's radio remained silent, suggesting that Marcus and Elena were either maintaining communication discipline or had encountered problems that prevented them from responding to his periodic check-in attempts. The stagnant water in the tunnel bottom soaked through their boots, carrying unknown contaminants that could cause infection or illness even if they successfully avoided the zombie threat above ground. Tyler suddenly stopped and raised his hand for silence, his young ears detecting sounds that Jake's older hearing had missed, the faint echo of movement somewhere in the tunnel system ahead of their position. They crouched motionless in the fetid water, straining to identify whether the sounds represented infected who had found their way underground or simply the settling noises of an aging drainage system. The sounds grew closer and more distinct, revealing themselves as deliberate footsteps moving through water with the careful precision of someone trying to avoid detection, suggesting that other survivors might be using the same escape route. Jake made the difficult decision to call out softly, risking exposure to identify whether the approaching figures were human or infected, his voice echoing through the tunnel with words that could mean salvation or doom. The response came immediately in the form of a familiar voice belonging to Dr. Amanda Foster, a veterinarian who had joined their survivor group 2 weeks earlier before becoming separated during a supply run to the medical center. Amanda's relief was evident as she emerged from the darkness with 2 other survivors, a teenage girl named Rebecca and an elderly man called Frank, all 3 showing signs of exhaustion and stress from their own harrowing escape from the infected town. Their reunion was bittersweet, as Amanda reported that the intelligent infected had systematically searched every building in the medical district, displaying organizational skills and tactical awareness that made traditional hiding spots completely ineffective. Rebecca, barely 16 years old, had witnessed her entire family's transformation into the enhanced infected, describing how they retained enough memory to return to their home and search for her with the methodical patience of human hunters. Frank's military background provided valuable insights into the infected's behavior patterns, as he recognized their coordination and communication as similar to special forces tactics he had encountered during his service decades earlier. The combined group now numbered 5 survivors, but their increased size created new challenges in terms of movement speed and noise discipline while navigating the confined tunnel system. Amanda's medical knowledge complemented Elena's nursing skills, but her veterinary background provided unique insights into viral mutations and evolutionary adaptations that could explain the infected's enhanced capabilities. Tyler's familiarity with the storm drain system became even more crucial as he guided the expanded group through increasingly complex passages, avoiding flooded sections and dead ends that could trap them underground indefinitely. Jake's leadership was tested as he balanced the need for speed against the requirement for stealth, knowing that their survival depended on reaching the military evacuation point before the intelligent infected could organize a comprehensive search of the underground passages. The radio finally crackled with Marcus's voice reporting that the infected crowd around the church had dispersed, but not before demonstrating disturbing new behaviors, including the use of simple tools and coordinated problem-solving that suggested rapid evolution of their cognitive abilities. Elena's medical update was encouraging, as Marcus's bite wound showed no signs of infection, but her observations of the infected's behavior patterns confirmed Jake's worst fears about their enhanced intelligence and tactical capabilities. Frank's military experience proved invaluable as he identified potential defensive positions and escape routes within the tunnel system, his strategic thinking providing the group with options they hadn't previously considered. The storm drain began to slope upward, indicating they were approaching the town's outskirts where the drainage system connected to natural waterways that could provide access to the evacuation zone. Amanda's discovery of fresh air currents suggested they were nearing an exit point, but the unknown conditions above ground created new uncertainties about what they might encounter when they emerged from their underground sanctuary. Tyler's courage continued to inspire the group as he volunteered to scout ahead, his small size and natural stealth making him the logical choice for reconnaissance despite the obvious dangers of separating from the group. Jake's decision to allow Tyler's scouting mission reflected his growing confidence in the boy's abilities, but also his understanding that their survival might depend on taking calculated risks that could provide crucial intelligence about the surface conditions. The sound of running water grew louder as they approached what appeared to be the storm drain's terminus, where the artificial tunnel system merged with a natural creek that could carry them away from the infected town toward the promise of military protection and safety. Rebecca's quiet strength impressed the adult survivors as she maintained her composure despite the trauma of losing her family, her resilience serving as a reminder that survival often depended more on mental fortitude than physical strength. The group's emergence from the storm drain into the pre-dawn darkness marked not just their escape from immediate danger, but their transformation from isolated survivors into a coordinated team capable of adapting to the evolving threat posed by the intelligent infected who now ruled their former home.